We've got our smart drive.
Okay.
Hey, David.
Yes, sir.
They have a plug-in for the computer.
Sit down around here on the bottom side.
Wow, how are you? Good to see you.
That's how we get all of our top secret information to the Chinese.
Great, I've seen you for a while.
I can't believe that they allow
Staying healthy and happy.
they just
On the leg.
plug it in, download everything.
Hey, what?
Put it in your pocket.
Just like in the movies.
Plus viruses. So floppies, now you get viruses through those things.
Yeah, well, the Iranians know about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's right. We weren't supposed to know about that. So technically, that's an act of war. I mean, that's not the thing that you say, yeah, we did it. Some stupid idiot did. God.
Don't talk about Biden like that. I can't wait for the first vice presidential debate. Oh my God.
Yes. Either can I.
Oh man.
You know,
I may have to edit this video though.
you know, Palin was behind the curve to a large degree.
Yeah.
She made him look bad. There were 23 factual errors by that man. I don't think.
Yeah, but he gets graded on the curve.
I don't think Ryan's going to let him get away with it.
Oh, no.
She was too nice.
Yeah. Well, I think McCain's whole attitude towards not using his middle name and
I know, it's disgusting. I wrote him a letter. I was so angry.
yeah.
We're not in the Senate talking to another senator.
Right.
Honorable senator from the state of Illinois.
We'll go ahead and get started. Basically, what this is a meeting between the Board of County Commissioners and Maryland's Department of Planning staff. I understand state planning staff's been traveling to various counties, meeting with various boards on the legislation, Chapter 149, which was Senate Bill 236. If anybody has a cell phone or BlackBerry, if you please turn it off, put it on vibrate. There is no public comment here today. This is just a meeting between the board and staff to answer questions back and forth moving forward. With that, I'll defer to Mr. Sundstrom to move us forward here today.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jim had asked that I, just give a brief background for our guests from MVP as to how the Board of County Commissioners got to this point in the process. As you're well aware, Senate Bill 236 requires us to suggest that the county can draft a tiers by December 31st of this year. Guidance documents that you would like to have it by October 1st of this year in order for you to have adequate time to review and make comment on it back to us. Staff had initiated the process to create a tier map 1 through 4 based on the law. And David, I believe, will be putting that up, draft map 2, I believe that was David. That was initially presented to the board as a starting point to get the discussion moving forward on this issue, knowing that we had timelines looming and that we needed to start getting guidance and direction as to how we needed to proceed on this matter. So this was the initial map that was presented to the Board of County Commissioners. Subsequent discussion had taken place over several meetings in this room as to what was the most appropriate changes as well as revisions to that map moving forward. And what originally was agreed on by a consensus of the board was what is now known as draft map 4, which is on our website, on the planning and zoning portion of the website. David has that on the projected on the screen on the end of the room. This map is the one that will be the subject of discussion on a public hearing on September 4th, and that the commissioners are scheduled to decide what ultimately to adopt on September 18th. Maybe this, maybe a version of this, maybe something else based on public comment that they receive. So right now, that's where we are in this process. President Mullen would like to receive input from MVP
Great. Stephanie Martin and myself and a few others in the office have done some analytical work or review work on your draft map. And she has a slide show or a series of
What we've done
input
is done a sort of an informal review of the map that we saw based on the information that we have and the requirements in the bill. So there were a few areas that we thought we should raise as potential issues.
To go through the intricacies of the bill. I don't know if that's necessary this time. I think probably everyone's read it and knows what the tier ones you've seen. The guidance document, it's on the website, version 2, kind of knows how it looks like. There's a mapping tool there too, which I think you might use to try out a version of the map.
Yeah, David has, I think it's draft map 6.
Yeah.
My drafts are correct.
All the information is probably
Based on
there.
that.
Some is probably buried, you know, overlaid on, overimposed on everything, which is probably the only wrong thing maybe that's there. I don't know what's underneath, but that usually gets applied to just 3 and 4.
It appeared, it looked like that draft map 6 was this map with the areas dominated by agricultural forest
Kind of right on
top of it. But I'm not sure, is that?
Yeah, well, David can explain what,
Okay.
because he's the one who put it together, so I'll defer to him on
And one,
his
just.
mapping technique.
Okay,
It would be helpful to know what map MDP saw.
okay. The map that's on the screen right now, this is the map. This was the map that we saw.
This is draft
Your
map
draft
4,
four.
the one that is going to
Right.
public comment,
Yeah.
public hearing on September 4th.
Right. So this is the one that we generally evaluated based on theirs. So if you want to go to the next map. So this was just our first attempt at, you know, looking at the map, and there's some various components that we generally analyzed. And the first one was looking at municipalities and municipal growth areas. I realized that the Cecilton growth area is not represented probably correctly on this map. It shows the whole area that's the agricultural reserve as growth area. But in the comments, we say that the agricultural reserve probably should be mapped as a tier 4 with an annotation, noting that it's a municipal agricultural reserve area, rather than, it's not a growth area, but it's an area around the municipality. So this one shows the relationship of the county's existing tier map with the municipal growth areas. And there are a few places where we found that there were some really relatively minor, I think, inconsistencies between the municipal growth areas and what the county mapped in the tier maps.
When you say Cecilton's agricultural reserve, what does that mean? What is Cecilton's agricultural reserve?
It's in their comp plan. There's an area that surrounds the town. I assume it is probably to be somewhere in the green belt.
Yeah, there's a green
request.
belt they were
So
envisioning
they
around the
can-
town.
Yeah.
It's in their comp.
It is in the comp plan, yeah. I mean, it is, yeah.
Which for all intents and purposes, the county has it mapped correctly as tier 4.
Right.
So, I mean,
But it
but
just
there's
needs
no
to be-
issue there, it's just that it shows
Yeah.
up as.
I just wanted to highlight it so that you didn't think that we were trying to say that
Right.
that entire area around Cecilton was a growth area.
Yeah.
But most of them, like I said, are pretty, the tiers are largely consistent with the town's growth areas, but there are a few places, Port Deposit, there's that one area that is yellow underneath, it's tier 3 in the county's map, but it is in the Port Deposit growth area. There's a few places up near House of Sun that have that same issue.
So it should be tier 2 instead of tier 3.
It should be tier 2, and it could be, if it's outside of the water and sewer planning area, it could be tier 2 with an annotation that says it's growth area, but it's not in the water and sewer.
But I would think that if it's in a town growth area, it's clearly going to be served by public facilities.
Then, right, right, but it needs to, but if it's not in the water and sewer planning map that exists today, then it just needs to be annotated. It's tier 2, but it's just a note that says.
And it generally gets the A annotation to A, large capitals.
Really just annotated, and then in the explanation or a note on the map, it's why it's annotated, which would be growth area that's not currently in the water and sewer plan. Okay, so the next map. Yeah, that's out of the guidance document. It's explaining annotations. So this map shows the existing and planned sewer service areas superimposed on top of the map that you all produced. And we note that there are some locally designated growth areas in the gray areas on the map. There's the dark blue, the blue, and then there's a gray, the gray areas that are inside the growth area, but are not in the water and sewer plan maps. And those should also be a tier 2 annotated. And then there are the other parts of the growth area that are maybe low density growth areas or the mineral extraction areas that are on the map as tier 3. And that's okay, those are outside of the sewer service area, those are areas planned for septic development, I'm assuming. But those are the areas where we have to look at the land dominated by agriculture and forest land. And we'll show a picture of that later on in the map. So essentially, we just highlighted those, circled generally those areas that, from looking at the comp plan maps, show growth area, but it's on septic. If they're ever envisioned for development on sewer, then they would belong in a tier 2 annotated.
Okay.
But the way I've interpreted the comp plan and these maps, that's clearly not the intent. Okay. Next. One of the components to tier 4, one of sort of the predefined components of a tier 4 are the priority preservation areas and the rural legacy areas. Those are by definition tier 4 in the bill. And we noticed that there were some pockets of tier 3s sprinkled throughout those areas. There's also the only tier 3s that are by law are allowed in tier 4 are the rural villages. And we've highlighted those. You can see them in the northern, actually in the southern part too, but there's a few highlighted rural villages. Those should be tier 3. But everything else in the rural legacy areas and the priority preservation areas should be a tier 4. And it looked like maybe some of those areas were areas of existing development. And even if they are existing development, they should stay in tier 4. If they exist already, they won't be impacted by the bill.
Mm-hmm.
So they would belong in a tier 4.
Well, let me ask you about business local tier 4 with that as well. Because what we tried to do with draft map 4, as you see the speckled, was to give you a real snapshot of what's happening on the ground.
So it includes non-residential areas
Okay.
in there, right? So, but they should still be tier 4 if they're in the rural legacy area of the PPA. And the bill has no impact on non-residential growth.
Right, I
It's
knew that.
only, the impact is only on residential.
Residential.
Eric, can I ask you, why was Hilltop and Bell Manor, in the, our 4th map, it was shown as tier 3?
Hilltop Farm shows up in the master water and sewer plan that's having a community sewer system, so that's why it showed up as a tier 3. And they talking about the Girl Scout property up there in Conway, that's also shows up in the plan as having a community sewage system, so that's why it shows up.
Those could be shown as tier 1A, tier 1 annotated, since they have a sewer, even if those community sewer system, they could show up as a tier tier one annotated. It's probably the best category for this.
Mr. Giacomo.
If an existing subdivision is classified as tier four, will its dwelling units be used in the calculation to come up with the overall tier four density for a subsequent parcels, perhaps desire or proposal to subdivide?
You mean, I'm trying to understand the question.
Subdivision is approved, John?
Yes.
The subdivision's on the ground.
You built the.
Has existed for decades,
Okay.
which is pretty much the case in our NAR district. So will that density be used in the calculation to come up with the tier four, overall tier four density as the acid test or hurdle for any tier four subdivision? Up on the 20 threshold.
You have to have that net.
That's if you're gonna go for an exemption, you wouldn't do
Yeah,
that.
that's what he's asking.
Right, okay, yeah,
Right.
you, okay. I guess it
Well,
would, wouldn't it, the number of lots?
There's a lot of things that are gonna go into determining that exemption. And one of which is existing subdivision. But the idea is to look at existing subdivision in a couple of different ways. So looking at stuff that was built, older stuff versus, like in the case of Cecil, the down zoning happened, I don't know, 5-ish
2007.
years ago.
January versus
7. And so we would look at subdivision activity that was more recent, that reflects the current regulations and programs that exist more. We would look at that more than the older stuff. So like stuff that was built or that was subdivided before the down zoning came into effect would be looked at, but not, we would look more carefully at the most recent activity.
For the net.
And then we're also most concerned about the future potential of development within those areas and whether or not that yield is 1 per 20. And then really, I should have backed up. The first thing that we're going to look at when it comes to that tier 4 exemption is that do the rural zoning districts, the majority of the rural zoning, the rural area have a allowable density of 1 per 20 or less dense. And if it doesn't, then sort of the way the guidance lays it out, if it doesn't have that, then we probably won't look much further than that.
That question, I guess, is dealt with on page 16 of the guidance document, 72.2.7.
Okay, did you say, David, since you're there?
16.
Yeah, the other part of that question is those subdivisions that are on the books. Bracebridge might be another one of those, whereby it's approved, it's done, it's in the books, it's a matter of it proceeding down the pipe to happen. Is not affected in tier 4 category. So if it's either built or it is platted or approved to be built, it can move forward. The bill looks at things going forward from this point on that have not had any subdivision activity on them. And that's what the bill greatly affects.
Or if they're grandfathered by the October 1st.
Or if they're grandfathered by other activity that's in, and, yeah.
Subdivision has to be approved to be grandfathered by October 1st.
No.
It doesn't have to be approved.
Needs to be
No.
submittal for approval.
Submittal, right,
Submission.
submittal. So it depends on, right, how they do for their perk tests and when that, you know.
But they have to get their preliminary approval by October 1st, 2016.
2016, right, to go through the full process. So it gives enough time for wet season to happen and.
Maple Mr. Guidebook on the next page 17 starts dealing with the grandfathering provision.
Are you planning on putting in or trying to do an exemption?
Well, we were at the meeting in Crownsville, and that was part of the discussion 2 months ago with that roundtable. And the idea was to figure out how to get to the net. So you say, okay, well, I've got approved subdivisions that are approved, to Tony's point, years ago. And then if you back out the preserve lands, either through the federal, state, or local programs, if you read the guidance document, you have to back all that out, and then whatever is left over is the net.
The actual overall.
Yeah, the overall yield, and then.
Right, it's more forward-looking, I think, than
Okay, so-
backward-looking.
So in layman's terms, Tony's point, you're looking for, we're not going to use
We're
those
not-
subdivisions that are old.
We won't look at those as, we won't look, we won't, I won't say we won't look at those, but we're gonna focus more on things that have happened since the latest
Okay.
zoning has been in effect, and looking forward.
And then
what
Steph,
potential.
right, Steph's other point is your NAR and your SAR yield have a different yield. And as a tier 4, they're gonna be added up together and treated as, you know.
It's treated as one, so
one.
the fact that the NAR is 110 will probably impact.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So
That's
maybe a
the
large
first
hurdle
cut.
to reach.
Kind of-
Well, it was something,
Plus the concern in Cecil County is that we have significant federal, state-owned properties, plus there's been a lot of easement properties purchased over the years or donated. So if you're backing out all that acreage, it would make it seemingly difficult to achieve that one.
to hit that
Yeah,
yield.
yeah. Was that?
No, there's more, there's more.
Okay.
Is it possible to get a copy of this? that we can
Sure,
have?
sure, I mean, I think you put it.
You have it
It's
there?
mine now.
Darn, I should have brought my personal that I was using. Okay, so could you give me the next one?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So the next look at this was looking at areas that are planned or zoned for resource conservation or agriculture. So there are some areas that were in the county's map, tier 3 area, that are in well, I think those are all NAR areas. The 3 circled areas on the map point to the areas that have, based on the data that we have, and you know, if there's a data issue, then we need to hear that too, but based on the data we had, these areas are all in the NAR zoning district and therefore would belong in a tier 4 by definition.
Did there also show up on your comp plan as resource conservation areas?
Right.
So it's not a
Right.
the growth area per se.
This just highlights those same areas and looks at the comprehensive, looks at it next to the comprehensive plan map, which shows where there's resource conservation and rural preservation districts that probably should be tier 4. This one shows there's another criteria for tier 4 in the law that talks about protected lands. And if the areas are preserved, the state or county easement, or parkland should be mapped as tier 4. And the area circled there was the area that we found some tier 3 within. That's up next.
Elk State Park has an active sanitary sewer system.
Okay, so
that serves
maybe-
both sides that are identified there as tier 3.
Okay, so maybe that is an area that should go to a tier 1A. Those ones that are served, those areas that are served by there. So it's not intended for future growth, but it's served by sewer. Okay. Okay, next. And this is the last one. This is looking at areas dominated by ag and forest. And when we look at this layer, we only want to look at it in the areas that are not planned, that are not in a tier 1 or 2. So the GIS layer that we put online has a complete statewide coverage of areas dominated by ag and forest. These are areas that are 100 acres or more of contiguous ag and forest land. This provision in the bill applies to areas that are not zoned for resource conservation, not planned for sewer service, and have significant tracts of agriculture or forest lands. They should actually be, those areas should actually be in tier 4 by definition in the law. This is our interpretation of, this is our map that shows, well, it's our layer over top of the county's map that shows where in the tier 3 areas there are areas dominated by ag and forest. It's just it's our GIS layer is a tool for you all to use. We're not, by putting this up here, I'm not saying that the county should follow every single polygon that we have up there. It's a guide to indicate what when we base it on these land use layer, this is what you would come up with. So there could be things like, part of a parcel of a backyard or something that got captured in a larger ag and forest area that you would want to, think about refining that a little. And that would be, or use your own local land use information that you may have that maybe would be a more detailed or a more current representation of what's on the ground. So this is, I'm sorry.
The area on the westerly side of the Elk River that's shown as tier 3 now is part of the growth area that has been subdivided over the years, so there is very little agriculture. There's only one farm left in that area that hasn't been subdivided, the Mank farm. Okay,
it kind of looked to me, and that's a good point, because we can't always show, our land use layer may not show subdivided lands, reflect subdivisions that have not been built. So it could be subdivided and still have farmland when you're looking at it from imagery, you see a farm and you see a forest, but it's already subdivided. Our information does not capture this.
In the extreme northeast, there where Glen Farms area has been subdivided back in the 1950s and built out over the last 60 years.
It seems to.
It may look like it's dominated by forest, but in actuality, it's a fairly medium density.
Yeah, it seemed to me that there wasn't too much real contiguous ag and forest in that area. It looked like there were a few places where it was like contiguous to the tier 4 area. There were a couple of like sort of larger blocks that were right on the edge that were contiguous to the tier 4 area that was next to it that might make sense to map. But by and large, when I looked at it,
it's just a background of weather.
Yeah, and I mean, I think John and I were talking earlier this morning, and I sort of said that, wow, this is pretty much. So.
And the ag between Perryville and Northeast, that's the part of the mineral extraction district that you were referring to earlier.
Yeah, and that, yeah.
So, I mean, those are the reasons why we mapped them the way we did.
Right.
And I mean, that kind of, I think, makes sense.
Just putting that layer on the.
Right.
Tier 2A, it's like something like that.
It could be tier 2A because it's part of the growth area in the comp plan. It could definitely fit into tier 2A.
It's slated for residential subdivision.
Well, that's the mineral extraction.
That area.
Yeah. So that's what we had in terms of our general informal review of the maps that we had. We did not have the GIS files for it, so there could be a more thorough review moving forward. But I think we addressed all major concerns from our perspective.
That's a lot more than 54% in tier 4. Are there any other counties that have this much?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, mechanical.
there are some counties who have.
They don't have any municipal areas.
No, they don't. And there are some counties that will have, like, really no tier 3.
Yeah.
None.
I have a question. Before I was elected county commissioner, I sat on the comprehensive plan oversight committee. And we were given population projections for 2030. And I think that our goal was to try to manage the growth in the county to accommodate that growth projection. And we analyzed that growth projection to determine to match the acreage and densities of the acreage to reach that projection. Now, it seems to me, based on what I see of this map in particular, that we've taken out of play many acres. Or you're proposing that we take out of play for growth many acres. How can we match the population projections based on this type of map?
It's a question that's been asked by other places. The projections that Maryland Department of Planning has put out still fit into these scenarios. Where they fit in, or where you'll find them fitting in, is probably going to be a more ratio of 80-20, 80% inside your sewer service areas, your PFAs, 20% outside. So those numbers don't necessarily and have not been affected and won't be adjusted. Talked with Mark Goldstein about this across, every county, and they're holding what they have. There's no net effect. It's a matter of where that development gets put. That's the answer to that question.
As I recollect, we figured that we would have to accommodate growth in the growth corridor under denser land uses with public facilities. And of course, in the growth area, it was always assumed to be public facilities. And we, in my mind, and in the mind of many others, we thought the density was even rather high for what we are accustomed to here in Cecil County on a per acre basis. And so I still don't see how you're proposing that we reach that population density, population projection, with taking out many acres of land that we can use. I don't get it. You're saying that we changed the formula, but I thought we had analyzed that as a committee when we put the plan together. And quite frankly, what I see is you didn't like the plan, so you're telling us you don't like our comprehensive plan. We want you to do this instead.
Don't take that personally, but no, not really. But
because this does not look like our comprehensive plan.
Well, let's back out for a minute here and understand that the legislation, what we're showing you here, is what the legislation lays out and would
I'm not blaming
classify.
the Maryland Department of Planning. I'm just saying that what I see is not our when I look at that map, I don't see the comprehensive plan map.
You might if you clean it up a little bit.
Yeah,
Actually, because you got a lot of different colors going here. Like, I think the yellow in the background is the little speckles is maybe.
I mean, like we were sort of just talking about, there is definitely room to, take this map, this dominated by ag and forest piece, and clean it up a little bit and make the areas a little bit more contiguous and a little less looking like, Swiss cheese outside of the sewer service areas.
Right.
But
Well, it looks like
by
you've
and large,
identified large, like for an example, down where the circle is in the middle, just below that.
right,
I mean, yeah, that's dominated by forest, but
but
it's in PFA and it's also, mineral extraction district, so, I mean, if you take
it's mapped that way in the comp plan, so
Right.
that could be changed to
Right.
a tier 2A.
but I mean, if you use your
Yeah.
mapping system
Yeah.
that that you have, and then you come down on top of that's why it shows like that.
And I just want to,
understand what you're
I
saying.
want you to understand too, that this map that you're seeing on the screen is not what MVP proposes to be the map. When you combine all the different pieces that we looked at, you could then derive, an adjusted map based on that. These are just, in general, some of our information kind of overlaid one at a time. The priority preservation area and the rural legacy area, those are, well, the PPA at least is in the comprehensive plan. And the rural legacy areas are, it's the program. So those sort of by definition in law need to be in the tier 4. And the other areas, I mean, the area with the biggest ability to adjust or fix is this dominated by we want to see folks make an effort to map those areas, and then a lot of in that far eastern circle, not the one in the northeast, but the one sort of in the middle, that area I think was also zoned NAR. So most of that's going to be tier 4 by zoning.
One thing, if I could make a point, just for your future discussions when you guys are back in Baltimore. David, if you could bring up draft map 4, just for illustrative purposes. I think an unintended consequence of all of this in Cecil County's case and others counties can speak for themselves based on their own growth pressures that are facing them. When you look at draft map 4, especially in the northern part of the county, a lot of those yellow areas and the green areas that are showing up as tier 3 are properties that have been subdivided or in the process of being subdivided. A lot of that was prior to the housing market collapse. The northern part of the county was feeling stress from spillover development from the east, from Newcastle County. We were getting it from Hartford and Baltimore counties in the west moving up into Cecil County, and we're also seeing it moving down Route 1 out of Pennsylvania into the Rising Sun region prior to the housing market collapse. If the market economy ever comes back, and if this is still in effect at that time, and if that area, tier 4 area up there, is still limited to minor subdivision only, and that pressure comes back, then that's going to lead to a serious fragmentation issue going on to meet the demand of individuals who would like to reside in that rural area, which is going to put stress on the agricultural communities that are up there and put pressure on them to think about perhaps throwing in the towel and saying this isn't working for us anymore, because your demand is going to have to be satisfied by more properties being purchased and subdivided, which would be an unintended consequence of minor subdivisions only, so that demand
has to go somewhere.
And then it's going to lead to more fragmentation occurring up there and more stress on the agricultural operations. So that's something that when you're having your discussions and meetings on not only this Senate bill, but for future actions, keep that in mind. That,
I guess the question is it better to have a few subdivisions, or is it better to have a whole bunch of 20-acre McMansions? And that's just a question but my concern is that, as we know, land preservation, most farmers would like to preserve their land and they would get paid for the development rights. And one of the problems is there's either not enough money or their expectations for the development rights are too high as far as the value. And what I see is putting farms into tier 4 will really devalue their development rights to practically nothing. So they'll never be able to sell because there's no value, because normally what they get paid for is the difference between farmland and development land. The differential is what they get paid. If you stick them into tier 4, what do they have to sell, to offer? What's their incentive to preserve? Or is tier 4 preservation automatic?
You want to speak to that, or you want to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can just refer to, some information that is on the website, the task committee.
That was a concern in the subject
force.
task force from 2011.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah, because it was last fall.
September, yeah, one is September 21st, I think. There's,
There
go
was
to our
a-
website, there's things you can pull down, and there's studies that have been done across the state, control counties. I'm not gonna go into the depths and detail of it, that's the PowerPoint. I did print out, and I'll be glad to leave it with you. This is the text that goes with that talks to that issue of land values and downzoning and how that has affected land prices. And while perceptions and realities oftentimes are both correct, they're sometimes both not correct. What this found was that there really was not a value loss using actual sales figures through the time and analysis of
And that was
when that
done,
downzoning.
where was that done in Cecil County?
It wasn't done here.
Right.
It wasn't done here, but it was done in Baltimore, Howard.
There was a study
Macomb.
that looked at pairs of counties, ones that had more restrictive zoning and ones that had less restrictive zoning. And I believe there were a few examples. One
Because
was-
all the professionals in Baltimore went up to northern Baltimore County and bought land for high dollars because they could afford it.
They also looked at a couple of places on the eastern shore, like Conoco and
Right,
Western
in
counties.
very, very rural counties, that there wasn't any development potential.
Let me help you out on the equity piece. When the downzoning took place in 2007, the formula used was in the Northern Ag District was ascending density of 1 unit per 5 acres, and in the southern tier was 1 unit per 3 acres. So basically, the idea was to grandfather that density, attach it to the real estate, and then that way, if and when someone wanted to sell those, you could just attach them as you needed them to sell them as ascending density. So the idea was the return, that was to ensure that there was equity still to be used in the real estate itself. Okay, so that was part of the formula that was used back in 2007. In fact, I believe Secretary Scott was the Cabinet Secretary for Planning. That was one of the issues that helped facilitate that along. So that helped with that piece, but the piece at the Crownsville meeting, which we'll probably need an answer to, I know you can't do it today, would be if we're going to keep the MALF and the Rural Legacy and the county program, in particular, we have our own county program. What would we base those? What would we base it on? In still the same formula with the per acre basis,
Right.
for value.
So for value, the calculation is the old density.
Well, basically what they did was they inverted it. Yeah, no, they inverted it in the northern agricultural area. The ascending density was 1 unit per 5 acres.
Right.
So if you had 100 acres, you have 20 transferable rights to sell to the receiving area, which
Okay.
would be down 40.
Okay.
And in the southern tier, the ascending density was 1 unit per 3 acres.
Well, Senate Bill 236 says it's not going to interfere with any TDR program, so that, at least that, from that perspective, those densities stay in effect
Yes.
for anybody wishing to sell. So they can still sell at 23.
But I think just the question that we need is just a matter of the two state programs and the county program moving forward. Will that formula stay the same for value? I got a yes at the meeting, but then I didn't,
Yeah,
it stopped right there.
I want to say yes.
I mean, I say yes too, but
Yeah.
we just should
Right.
probably just verify.
Yeah, that if the formula is going to stay the same or if it's going to change.